drop-down menus. So again, I'm going to add another div. And this time in this div, we're going to add 3 different selects. So 1, 2, 3. Let's start with this first one, which is for month. And let's go ahead and start with the label. There's only one label here for everything. So I'm going to do it like this. Label, and put all 3 selects inside. And this label is going to say birthday. And it's going to look like that. So if we see what we get, we have our 3 inputs, our 3 labels. And all that we need to do is add in the correct data inside. So that's a bunch of options. So the first one, let's go ahead and add, I'm just going to do 2 or 3 here. So this will be for months. So we'll do Jan, Feb, and March. The next one, we'll do the same thing, just a few options. And this will be for day. So we'll start, let's do double digits. So 10, 11, and 12. And the last one will be the year. Let's just do 3 again. And let's do 1999, 2000, 2001. Great. And you can see we get our drop down here. There is one small difference though, which is that ours start right away with January and numbers and the year. But the one that I gave you starts off with month, day, and year. So there's a few ways of doing that. The simplest one is just to make the very first option say month, day, and year. And by doing that, HTML, the form just picks the very first option and it decides that's the initial value. So that's the most common way of doing that. So now our form looks pretty good. We just need our final I agree to terms and conditions checkbox. So we can add yet another div here. And let's indent this properly. Our final div inside of this one, we're going to, let's start with a label. This time, let's do for, and this one, let's call it agreed. I agree to the terms and conditions. And then the next thing that we need is our input type equals checkbox. Let's give it ID equals agreed. And to name, we'll also go with agreed. And let's see what we get. Looks good to me. So one thing that we also need to add to our select tags is a name. So let's just call this month. And this one will be day, and this one will be year. And remember that if we didn't want January and Feb and Mar to be what was actually sent through, if we wanted it to be something different, like a number corresponding, we would put a value here. So for Jan, we might put value 1. In this case, I'm fine with just having Jan there. I didn't specify how it needs to behave. So we come back here. It looks pretty good. Everything looks the same. The last thing we really have to discuss is the actual password validation. So I want to just show you how you could go about finding that. So I'm just going to open up HTML length validation. And let's try that. As you can see, I've actually already been here. This is something I had to look up recently. And it looks like, so this is Stack Overflow, by the way, if you haven't seen this before. This allows someone to pose a question. Is there any other attribute in HTML with the help of which I can set minimal length of value for fields? And then people provide answers, and the highest voted answers appear first. So this answer says, you can use the pattern attribute. The required attribute is also needed, otherwise an input field with an empty value will be excluded from the constraint validation. Okay? So it looks like this is all we need. So this is an input, and we give it pattern equals, and this weird looking thing, and then required, and then this title. So before we even ask about what this even does and what this 5,10 does, let's just see. So let's go ahead, find our password. And this is a lot of what being a developer is. It's a lot of copying and pasting some things or finding some code and tweaking it. So we need to make this fit what we have, which is an input name is password, type equals password. So I'm just going to copy these 3 attributes. So now we have type is password, pattern is 5,10, required, and title equals 5 to 10 characters. So let's see what that does. Refresh this. Make sure we have everything else filled out. I click submit, and it tells me, please fill out this field, 5 to 10 characters. I type 2 in, type 3 in, type more than 10, it doesn't work. But if I type 5 or 6, it does work. So let's explore a little bit more. Let's start with this one here. Let's change this to be password must be between 5 and 10 characters. And refresh. Make sure we fill out everything else so we can get this error. And I click submit, and you can see I get that message that we set. Password must be between 5 and 10 characters. So that's what this title is doing. It's basically the error message that is being displayed. So then the other new part is this pattern. And this is admittedly a little weird, but using this syntax, we're just defining the length, a range of the length that is acceptable for this input. So if we change this to be 2 to 3, I submit, still not acceptable. 1 is not acceptable, but 2 is acceptable. So this is just defining a range or a pattern that we need to follow. So there is definitely more to this. You can do other things besides a minimum length or a range of lengths, but that's all I needed you to find here. If you weren't unable to find that, don't panic. It's still very early on, but there are going to be more opportunities for you to attempt things like that. So I do have a full solution that I wrote up, which is complete in that it has the full day and year and month inputs. And you can see it's kind of a mess. I did not write this by hand, and I did not expect you to write this by hand either. So we'll see how to actually generate this later on in the class. You could use JavaScript to do it for you, so you don't actually have to write this all. So take a look at the solution if you have any questions.